You have to have program managers that take clear ownership. They have to be obsessed with that delivery and obsessed with owning that objective. If you don't have that and you have somebody who's comfortable in the corner taking notes, that's what that person's going to do. Frameworks over process. There is a tendency for PMOs or TPMs of like, oh, my delivery to this is a process. I think that's pretty far from the truth. Your delivery to that is to, help deliver the objective or own the delivery of that objective. I would also say get the right people. You need somebody who's going to take ownership, not take direction. That is, I absolutely adore when one of the, somebody on my team will go, Brett, that's a dumb idea. Here's why. And we'll push back, show that fearlessness, but it's because they own it. And that ownership is something that you want in your TPMs. I have seen all too often is we shortchange QA and things don't get found. And so it was kind of recognizing the pattern. I've tackled this in a couple of ways of QA being shortchanged. One is, at a previous company, I went and said, I want to own QA. And the person said, why do you want to own QA? I wanted to own QA because what I also wanted to do is I wanted to change how we were managing programs.
Today on Beyond the Boardroom, I'm thrilled to welcome Brett Conklin, someone who has built a career at the intersection of program management, product strategy, and engineering execution. Brett is a VP of Technical Program Management in Salesforce, where he leads a TPM team who drives cross-functional engineering initiatives. His journey has taken him through the halls of SGI, Adaptec, Kodak, and Walmart e-commerce, each chapter adding depth to his perspective. What is especially interesting about Brett is how he has bounced between TPM, product, and engineering roles over the years, giving him a rare 360-degree view of how ideas turn into working systems inside some of the world's most innovative companies. So, Brett, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks.
All right, Brett. So we'll talk about strategy. We'll talk about execution. We'll also talk about testing. I know you're very passionate about that.
Yes.
Also talk about TPM skill set, all the good stuff. But before that, I want to start from something very specific. So last time we spoke, you talked about the skills needed for program management or TPMs, especially on the technical side.
Yeah.
That really resonated with me. Genuinely believe that technical depth is a very critical asset for any project manager, program manager, say that role, right? PM, if you will. So you had a pretty unique entry to the world of program management or technical program management, if you will, coming through a tools team. So that's not an usual route we hear about. So tell us a little bit more about your journey. How did you find yourself on program management path through tooling and systems team?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's interesting how I came to that because I came out of college and I was hired onto a team. It was a tools team that was inside the program management area. As we were building tools like bugs online tools that managed patches and bugs and builds and different things like that. This is before a lot of these tools were kind of more mainstay, and this was inside of Silicon Graphics. And my very first run-in with a TPM was not a positive one, actually, which was a person came into the middle of this cube that I was sitting in and got in somebody's face and asked them when they were going to be done. And, when is this going to be delivered? That person left, and I went back to the person who was asked the question. I kind of went, who was that? Because I was a new college guy and, fresh out of college. And they said, oh, that's a program manager. And I went, aren't we on that team? And they're like, well, kind of. And so it's one of the things that I vowed to never ask an engineer, which is, when are you going to be done? So it's sort of a formative moment as a TPM on what not to do, even though it was one of my first interactions with the TPM. Where that went from there is we were building tools and we were heavily involved in the mechanics of innovation, right? Of managing tools, bugs, patches, et cetera, like I said. And so we became highly integrated, us tools engineers. And then this program management team picked up, as that would happen in the late 90s, they picked up and moved to another area, another company. And one person said, hey, would you like to come work here? And I liked the people I worked with kind of, I guess, more than the company I was in. And so I went over there and was doing the same exact job of building tools inside of basically building out the first wiki and those types of things inside of engineering. And a principal scientist came and asked me, he's like, hey, I need your help. And when a principal scientist, these are the types of engineers that you find out later that they're the creators of OpenGL or on the original SCSI spec, which I know is probably showing my age, but these are the scary people. When they come and they talk to you, you're like, I better have the right answer. So he came to me and said, hey, I need your help. IP encapsulation over the SCSI protocol, which is kind of a fancy term for network attached storage. And he said, what I need from you is you do web stuff, you do development. We're a hardware company. I need you to build a demo that are going to make the drive lights blink, which is a big thing back then. The drive lights had to blink and we had to show a bunch of web pages quickly. And so I wrote a tool that would we had to not do it in a browser. So I had to kind of render it separately because it couldn't go out and hit cache. It had to pull these things from the disks to make the drive lights blink. And that scientist said, okay, we're bringing this to market and I want you as the program manager. I'm sure I'm a developer. And he says, no, well, you're on the program management team and I don't want just any program manager. I want somebody who understands what's going on. And he's like, so I want you. And at this time, I was by far the youngest person on the program management team because I was the tools guy. And I managed that program. Took me to a lot of places. It took me to a lot of conferences. I met with a lot of people in the storage and IO subsystems area, which was exciting to me. And I would say 6 months later, was running the ASIC, the chip, basically what the company produced. I was running the next incarnation of that for the next generation of products. So it was just this, a goofy web developer building tools to running one of the larger programs. And it was just that having that technical ability and that ability to kind of bring people together and connect with folks that kind of turned me into a TPM, honestly.
I love that. Now, you were that engineer in the program management team who got pulled into all the technical conversation. That's such a fun way.
We had another it was another opportunity, and this company was the first company to embed its drivers into the Linux distribution. And so I also got a lot of I had a lot of technical influence because that brought me to a lot of conferences and a lot of speaking engagements. And I was deemed as the engineer who could speak to people, which was also it's a good title to hold, I guess, but that's what they deemed me. So I ended up at a lot of conferences and a lot of speaking engagements as the guy who could speak technically.
I love that, like engineer who could talk to people. I might steal that from you.
Yeah, go ahead.
That makes me think something once you said that architects and TPMs are more alike than people realize. So tell me more about it. Where do you see the parallels between these two roles?
So ironically, this is a lot of my close colleagues and close friends are architects. And we partner well together. I'd say for two reasons. One is, and a lot of the larger initiatives that I've been deployed on, you're kind of the yin and yang of an overall program. There's all the technical aspects that the architect owns that's not fair, not technical aspects, the architectures that the architect owns in creating, and then the TPM who owns the outcome. And I really see architects as they own the delivery of a technical solution, and TPMs could be deemed that architect of an outcome because we have to own everything, understand the macro environment, understand how this all applies. And it's a very similar pattern to me. And the really good architects have a similar skill to a TPM, which is they have to understand what the problem is and the outcome they're trying to render. I think all too often, when anyone gets deployed into trying to solve a problem, they will get buried in the issue du jour or what is right in front of them and lose sight of what the goal was, what it is you're trying to accomplish. And architects have to keep that front and center so they can keep, razor focus on what should be delivered, as does, the TPM has to do something very similar. So, have a clear problem. The next piece you need is a clear inventory of tools. Like, what do you have at your disposal? That is similar across architecture and in um, program management, because, an architect may go, I have this specific infrastructure. I can't have a quantum computer to do my web delivery. I have to work within the resources I have. And a TPM has to do the same thing, in that I don't have infinite engineers. I don't have infinite time. How do I fit within the constraints that are there? And, that sets the definition of done, which is very clear in architecture, very clear in program management. And finally, how I think one of the more artful pieces of both roles is how you break that down, in that you have different teams as the program manager and that what has to be delivered. And if you build that correlation, architects have different services and say those services have to interact, and they have to interact to deliver on a solution. I have to have teams that interact and deliver on an objective. And so that I see a lot of correlations between the two. And just to bring it to to somewhat of a personal level, I had a close friend who we were working on a large program. And as we were delivering I want to say it was about a 2.5 year program. And about 6 to 9 months into it, he moved to Dublin, Ireland. We could interchange just enough. He had very clear things he had to deliver, and I had very clear things I had to deliver, but we could interchange just enough to we could almost work the program around the clock. Because right as he was finishing up in Dublin, I could take over in the US, and then I could, have my day, commute home, and then kind of pass it off to him over a text. And we could work and hand off work between ourselves, just because it was a similar problems and we were dealing with similar problems no matter what the role was. And so I see a lot of correlation to architects and TP.
I think nobody has put that together for me the way you did. Like, it's a wavelength matching, right? TPMs and architects, they both orchestrate the program from different perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do see many organizations, they have TPMs at the driver's seat, just like how you mentioned. But then there are other organizations I have seen as well, TPMs more like note takers, meeting scheduler, or at best, non technical process police. So, how do we shift this narrative? How do you do differently? What do you do differently as a TPMs to change that perception?
I have to say, where I say, oh, I've got a lot of close friends that are architects. I have also, some of my best friends are program managers. And this role of a TPM, we have dealt with it countless times. And I think I think it's the issue I deal with on the most consistent basis throughout my career. And so I think how you change it is you have to have program managers that take clear ownership. They have to be obsessed with that delivery and obsessed with owning that objective. If you don't have that and you have somebody who's comfortable in the corner taking notes, that's what that person's going to do. So when I build out a TPM team, I look for people who are not going to just take the notes. I want people there's never going to be a question, should that person be at the table? Because that person is usually the head of the table and trying to run everything. And honestly, I appreciate the TPMs who get in just a little bit of trouble, because they, the engineering manager thinks they own that. And then you're taking ownership of all these things. And it's like, good for you. Like, A plus, that's what I want to see. And so I think it has a lot to do with the personality of the TPM who's involved. They have to assume ownership and never accept I won't be your note taker. Now, I think it's also very important for TPMs, especially when they're initially engaging with the team or initially engaging with the program, is that you try to provide value as quickly as you can. And that value may be, I got to go file a bunch of bugs. That's something that could have been handled by anyone else, but I have to go file a bunch of bugs. Or I have to do something that might be deemed kind of an administrative thing, but that is I've delivered initial value, and I have spoken that I understand the macro environment and how to deliver that. And so that piece is also key. And then the last part that I have seen is you have to you can't be a wallflower, right? If you were taking a passive role, you were going to be put into a passive role. I, I have from a personality perspective, and a lot of the TPMs that I would say are successful TPMs in my eyes are the ones who are kind of extroverted, kind of want to be in the center of things, kind of appreciate kind of leading a room of people to an objective and really, really get off on that. The team delivered this. And when it comes to speaking about the success of that team or the success of the delivery, the TPM should get a real kick out of kind of sitting back and watching the team shine, knowing that they made it all happen. And nowhere in that description did I say, and they took the notes and they're super detailed and they're super organized and they've controlled the chaos. None of these things are things that I look for. It's more that, are you delivering? And so that's how I kind of break out of the note taker. And it's also how I TPMs on the team to be.
Love this. So I think two things I would say. You said that, like, you won't mind TPM getting into trouble a little bit. So I think
Yeah.
that is so important. Sometimes nobody defines the role, right? So nobody defines what an engineering managers will do, what a product manager will do, and in between that, what a TPM will do.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that ownership and not worrying about getting into a little bit of trouble to kind of really establish that, hey, we all own the program together and drive to that conclusion. I think
Yeah.
that is very, very key, right? So,
Yeah, I will say I made a career choice actually, where I had a choice of going into a kind of a more product focused TPM role versus an infrastructure TPM role. And what I noticed in the infrastructure area is that there were less decision makers, which was, there was essentially engineering management and there wasn't a UX and product and document and all these other. I was like, man, this is a target rich environment for somebody who likes to kind of run things and set direction, not just execute on direction. And so I will say, in my current position, that's what led me into infrastructure was the ability to float between different roles and kind of not be boxed in.
I think that's very true. I think I have experienced something similar from product and infrastructure as well. You're absolutely right. There is more direct impact or decision making capability that TPM can influence, if you will, right? So that's definitely one area. But one thing that I'll just tie in onto that as well. So we often hear about TPM being both strategic and tactical. Sometimes you have to be very high level. Sometimes you have to be in the weeds. But how do you balance these two? What's your experience in the right balance, and where does TPM truly shine?
It's between technical and
Tactical and strategic, if you will.
oh, tactical and strategic. Okay. That is one where I think it's important to keep your role in mind and what the objective of what it is you're trying to deliver in mind, because, and that's a little bit of an art. It's not a science in that you have to go and weigh the opportunity cost in that you have to say, I'm supposed to be a strategic tool to deliver this large initiative. And in being that strategic tool, there are moments where I'm going to have to dive into the tactical. And at this moment, the team is stuck in a tactical area. So I have to engage in a tactical area to break the team out. And so they can get back to execution. And we might have to do it to save a schedule or save a delivery. And I think that's an art. And I think it also provides value not only to the organization, but it provides value to the TPM to understand when you make these strategic decisions, what is happening tactically. I go back to a moment when we were at a previous role, we were updating a e-commerce system and we had this catalog of products that we needed to get out. And that catalog of products, they had no way of creating it, meaning there was no data behind it. The previous system was all entered manually. And so what we needed is we needed somebody to go, for this e-commerce delivery to be successful, we obviously need a catalog of products. So that is when I went, okay, I'm going to take 2 months. I'm going to hang up my TPM hat and I'm going to write a ton of Python scripts and build a bunch of database tables and such to basically create that product catalog and then deliver that back to the program and then hang up my developer hat and then step in. And that was a moment where I went to the painfully tactical to ensure that we delivered that the overall objective, because it was just there wasn't really a ton of people who could have done that. And it was an area I have just through previous experience, a lot of ETL experience. So I had a lot of data movement and data transformation skills. And so it landed well. And I'm like, look, I could do this in, a month or two and get all the products out to the website much faster than a lot of my colleagues. And so I left and did it. But what was good about it is I really understood that e-commerce system and I really understood how it all worked. And then decisions going forward, you have an understanding, you have a tactical understanding as you're trying to deliver strategically. So that I think is how I balance tactical and strategic.
Also feel like, this also builds into what you kind of called out, like extreme ownership, right? So you own the program, you own the outcome of the program, and you're willing to do things to make it successful, whatever it takes. So I
Right.
think
Yeah.
that extreme ownership kind of really builds into it when you're thinking about both strategic versus tactical as well.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
had a leader at my current company that he was a SQL approver. And basically what that meant is as queries were going to production, they had somebody who looked at the queries and said, this one makes sense to run, this one doesn't make sense to run. And I got a note saying, wait, you wrote this? The answer is yes, I wrote that. And he went, why? And it's like, because no one else would. And he's like, that is not something I've seen from a TPM here. And so I thought it was awesome. There were other TPMs who were like, why would you do that? I'm like, I don't understand why I wouldn't. It had to be done. So,
I think that's so important. Like, why wouldn't? So if you can, why not? So love that. I think that is a very, very important part to make a program successful. That mindset to do what it takes to get things done. Right. So that's really
absolutely.
great. Yeah. Yeah. You kind of touched upon it. We get so caught up firefighting issue du jour that we forget to step back sometime, look at the big picture, like why we're doing something.
Yeah.
What helps you shift from that reactive to strategic thinking when you are leading programs?
Jeez. It's a little hard, I would say, at the moment because, I have a team of people and I'm managing a portfolio and all you're dealing with is issues that come out of these portfolios. I think where I get really engaged strategically is to set up these initiatives appropriately when they start. And that not only sets the direction, but it sets the strategy and it sets a clear strategy. So not only can myself or the TPM that I'm trying to enable, but also the organization towards success. So I will say that switch for me happens in initiation. And then after it is set up and going, then I will kind of at the tactical level, because I am kind of just feeding and unblocking the TPMs or even the teams who are involved in the initiatives that I'm running in within my portfolio. So to me, there's a quick, clear initiation step that is very strategic. And I will turn that off and slip into the tactical. Now that happens, back and forth every 10 minutes, but there is a very clear, like, how do I get this set up right to get going? I also think as, TPMs own and should have a mastery. Back to another question, they should have a mastery of the macro environment. What's going on? What's happening? What is this team going through that this team is not going through, and how those teams may interact? Like that has to be one of those skills that a TPM has. And so I will turn off the tactical, turn on the strategic when we have a problem that we have to address as an organization. And I get called into those types of activities a lot to kind of re-architect maybe a portion of the organization or re-architect how an organization delivers something. And to me, that is very strategic. And that I think is just kind of the nature of my role, in that you're bouncing between tactical and strategic, and you don't always see it as like a clear switch happening. So I think for me, removing blockers is kind of a tactical thing, and then setting strategy up appropriately is a bit of a strategic thing.
That makes complete sense. So I think you talked about setting it in the beginning the right way so that over time you don't have to keep changing. So that's a big part of it. One of the things I wanted to seed into it, you and I have talked about how testing or QA cycle often get overlooked during the initial project planning, right? I've
Yeah.
seen it firsthand too, especially end-to-end testing sometimes ends up becoming an afterthought.
Yeah.
Why do you think testing gets sometimes deprioritized, and what can we do to make it more intentional part of the program planning?
That's a good question. Just that pattern, I guess I've seen it enough times to where, program is due September 1st. When is engineering going to deliver? And this isn't a fault of this isn't a fault of engineering. I think this is just, it's how people work. Take engineering out and say, building contractor. If you say building contractor, this has to be done by September 1st. The work fills the schedule. And what I have seen all too often is we shortchange QA and things don't get found. And so it was kind of recognizing the pattern. And that is I would say is another superpower of the TPM is you have to have enough of a memory to have seen this before. This is what happens when you don't enable the sales team to sell your product. Like these are things you can see over and over again. And the QA, I've tackled this in a couple of ways of QA being shortchanged. One is, at a previous company, I went and said, I want to own QA. And the person said, why do you want to own QA? I'm like, well, I feel as if they're the face, not only of quality, but they're the face of the product, the end result. And, you can tell the difference between, say, an Apple product and another product. And Apple has a very strong QA because they are focused on what that product is and how it's delivered. And from that perspective, I wanted to own QA because what I also wanted to do is I wanted to change how we were managing programs in that I wanted to not deliver in a big bang. And what I wanted to do is work with engineering, work with QA to have a very clear kind of interim milestone. And that, you go from, say, an MVP, engineering demos that, you pass that demo off to QA starts to look at it, and then you keep building those iterative slices to that. And that was much easier for me to do as the owner of the program and the head of QA. We would call it QE in the area that we were in. And because of that, I could then set up the program to deliver quality throughout the whole delivery of the program, not just at the very end. And kind of recognizing that pattern is what made me kind of so obsessed with QE. I'll also say, engineering will deliver, their slice of the pie, their service, their UI, their back end, they will deliver their slice of the pie. But kind of the two biggest champions of the overall end-to-end product is, I would say, I bet you it would be a good fight between the sales engineer and the head of QE, because they're both going to understand that, like, this is where the real problem lies, and this is how our product works. And owning that and understanding that has really helped me throughout the years, because I get a full picture from the QA perspective that I don't necessarily get when I talk to an engineer or even an architect who's focused on a vertical slice.
I think that is so interesting because the similar thing we have ended up doing, saying that, okay, PMO at some point will also own testing. That is such an integral part of overall product delivery. So you can have all the engineering team there can also do this microservice-based testing. But then when you put all these pieces together, there has to be a overall end-to-end testing cycle, just starting from net new customers to how everything gets provisioned to really using the product. So that is very, very critical to align and have it in the right place.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I think that what you said is totally resonates. And, it's saying that, okay, if nobody is managing, let's go make it happen by ourselves. So that's again goes back to your extreme ownership, anything for the program.
Yes, I took on a multinational QE team just for that exact reason.
Love that. Love that. So a little bit of tactical question, if you
Sure.
will, right? So what does a typical day look like for you as a TPM or your team as a TPM? Or is there even such a thing as a typical day?
I don't know. I mean, I think the answer of, like, there's no typical day for me is I don't know. I think that might be people striving to seem busy. But what I will say, a typical area for me is, I will wake up. Obviously, I come from a heavy Slack company. Look at what Slacks are out there. We're not so much into email anymore. What's coming, then a standard, what is going on throughout my day. Then then I will take a look at my day. And this is where we go back to the, like, tactical versus strategic kind of mind shift, in that I will look at my day to go, okay, I have to tactically be ready for these meetings. And then I have to strategically find time to deliver on these larger areas where I need to produce work. I have kind of fought against having large TPM teams because I want to stay engaged. It's not a tactical level, but I want to stay engaged at the initiative level. And so that means that I'm probably never going to be a head of a 400 person PMO, but that's not how I work because I like to stay engaged and understand the problem. So that I'll look at my day to see where the spots are where I can accomplish some work that needs to get done. It's also what I work real hard to do is to have at least a touch point per day with all of my folks. I have about 10 people on the team. And for me, that's important not to sort of say, okay, Amarita, give me a status report so I don't look like an idiot when somebody asks me about what it is you're working on. I don't do that. I'm happy to look like an idiot and not know every nuance of the program. But what I do want to know is what are your current blockers? What are some issues? And I want to set up time to partner with every person on my team to kind of figure out we as a team are executing through the organization. And it's not a status update. And so I try to make room for that as much as I can. And then when there's the areas that I think there's, care and feeding items that you have to accomplish as a corporate citizen of doing the right trainings and this and that. Those are the hardest. I'm not going to lie, the hardest to fit in. Piece is I like to have an hour. Gosh, if I can swing an hour and a half, maybe 2, to kind of write that doc, build a position paper, come up with a framework. And I picked that purposely, pick a framework or kind of develop a framework to help the organization out and start to sell that. So to me, that feels very typical. And so I don't trust people who say there's no typical days. I don't know.
True. I feel like one of the question I wanted to ask, which probably you answered a lot of that already, but
Maybe.
just one thing. If you had a magic wand, right, what would you want to see at a glance every morning to feel fully control of your program project portfolio?
This is not going to be your typical answer. So I just warning you, get ready. I'm obviously in engineering, and I work at a company that is of a decent size. And what I'm often dealing with is dashboards and movements of metrics. It's a very metric heavy environment, which is great. So if I could see one tool, I would say as I'm looking at dashboards that I can, that I click or wave my genie over a particular area of a dashboard to understand where that data came from. All too often, we get a aggregate number. And as we look at this aggregate number, we go, oh, wow, okay, this seems like a problem. I should really delve into this. But as you look into let's take like a developer productivity effort. And as you'll see like, oh, we're getting this many check-ins across, 7,000 developers. And you go, okay, this seems like a problem. And then you actually dive in and spot check Git. You realize, okay, well, maybe this isn't that big of a problem. I need to really understand where this data is coming from. And then you find out, oh, well, that is pulled from a different system. And I do spend, and I guess back to the previous question, I do spend a lot of time trying to find out how the telemetry is getting to me and how the telemetry is getting to the rest of the org to understand it and react to it. And a genie of source, like if I had a kind of the old view source in HTML, you see like, now I understand how that came to be. If I could have that again for all the different metrics that we're looking at, it would make my life much simpler.
I think the source of data, how the data is curated, and is there proper data hygiene where we are pulling the data from? That I think those are so critical when we are looking at dashboards.
I also think having that also would allow engineers to be engineers, because I know I have done it in a foolish way where I put a bunch of numbers in front of engineers and had those numbers interrogated, and those numbers interrogated enough to a point where I'm like, I should never have put that information in front of those people. And I'm a complete idiot for doing so. Never do that again. So now if we could enable engineers to be engineers to go, here's your numbers, here's how they were rendered. We can let them do their thing and go, this is how I affect that number, and let the org react to that. right now I have to react to that, which is fine, but I have to react to that to kind of come up with a solution.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So, from dashboard perspective, I would be curious to know in a program dashboard, what are the things you would like to look at, right? What are the typical things or matrices that you would like to see?
I like a very simplistic view of a program. So if I was to say, a program for this call, let's say, like, I want to know what is the objective of this? It's like, okay, we're going to talk about TPM activities, and I want to make sure that that is clear. And then I want to see what has been delivered since we talked last. Like, I think we talked about a week ago. Like a week ago, this is what we talked about last, and that would be kind of the current status. And then what is coming up, and then what are the teams working on, which is kind of it's almost an agile practice of this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm doing today, and I'm not blocked. It's a very similar pattern. I'd also like to see the metrics for the program, right? So again, if we were talking about a developer productivity program, I want to see cycle time. I want to see commits, and I want to see these types of things and how that objective is being met by those metrics and how those trends are delivering on those metrics. So that's like, if there was one dashboard that I could get that across my portfolio, that would be tremendous.
Feel having a simplistic view really helps to kind of pinpoint and also not to forget the sources, right?
Yeah, totally.
So other thing I just wanted to talk to you about, like now Gen AI is getting a lot of momentum. What do you see the biggest impact for TPMs in terms of efficiency, decision making, or strategy?
I really feel as if Gen AI finally delivers on some of the promises that were made maybe a decade ago, of that, you really can pull the Tony Stark and say, give me a program charter that talks about these things, and you will at least get a basic document out of that, which is good. I feel as if Gen AI has down sitting there spinning, thinking of the right thing to write down, because, using Gen AI and kind of not just a general piece, but an area where give me something to work off of and edit, and you will get it 60% of the way there, and I will bring it to the remaining 40%, and kind of make it perfect. And so that, I will say, in communication and writing and such, it has really helped me out. As far as other areas, and this is where you get out of the Gen AI and into a little bit of the predictive AI area, in that I think we're going to start seeing, I have to send out this status to a particular, I have to send out this status based on what of what's being communicated now, and based on the information I'm about to communicate, we're the best venues to communicate this to. Because we've all done this, where we go, here is some information that I want to share, and you share it somewhere, not a single person sees it, not a single person reads it. You're like, okay, why did I do that? And you're like, well, there's a little bit of CYA, and there's also a little bit of, I didn't know what the right place to send it is. And I think AI can do a better job than I think we would to kind of determine what's the best place to share this. So I'd say those two areas for sure. I use it to create communications and some documentation. I will use it to start a doc. I won't use it to finish a doc. And as we see more advances on the promise of predictive, I think it's going to be a lot more useful for this role, for the TPM role.
Before we wrap, let's
Okay.
do a quick Beyond the Boardroom rapid fire. I love this part.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay.
All right, let's do this. So, your go to playlist or vibe for your focus time?
I like to have some sort of music, but there's a specific kind of music, and it's not a type of music. It's music that I've heard enough throughout my life that I love it enough, but I don't hear it, if that makes sense. So if I hear new music, I want to listen to it and go, that's interesting. So I want to hear things I've heard far too many times to get that. I want to hear some music satiated, but not necessarily where I'm going to pay attention to it. So it's usually probably some yacht rock or metal or something that I've listened to a ton of that I don't necessarily hear, if that makes sense.
What's your personal mantra when things get chaotic?
I will often say I prefer that if something is chaotic, it's because people want you engaged. And I love being engaged and love being the center of kind of the action. And so I will always say, when things get crazy, I'll be like, well, this is what you wanted. I'll say that to myself. probably a couple times a day. It gets crazy. I'm like, well, this is what you wanted. I tend to go bonkers, sort of not sitting's the wrong word, but waiting for action. So if I'm in the middle of the action, I'm kind of happiest.
What's one tool that you can't live without?
Okay. I have, and this goes back to a question we had earlier about Gen AI. You hear conversations happening, as we all know, God bless engineers, but they assume you understand the 3-letter acronym or the code name, and they assume you know that. And again, God bless them, but I don't know that. I was always had a Google thing going. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? What is a co-pilot versus an agent? And I'm always doing those things. And I have switched from Google, straight Google, to now using ChatGPT to ask the questions, because it's usually a razor specific answer, which I kind of appreciate. So Gen AI is the answer there.
Fantastic. So most underrated TPM superpower.
I mean, there are aspects that I look for in TPMs, and I want myself. I think and it's underrated. Fears that I feel as if there has to be a little bit of a fearlessness of, we have to go present to the board. All right, let's go. Like, let's go do it. Like, even though that might be terrifying for some, or there's some terrifying architect in the corner that nobody likes to talk to, that's the one I want to go talk to. And so I really find these, a bit fearless to the task, and there's no program that is too big or too scary, at least for me. And I like to see that in a lot of TPMs. I know my current team, there's not a single one of them who will go, ooh, God, that sounds too big and scary. Can I find something else? Not a one. They all want the biggest ones that I will assign them. And so it's a breath of fresh air to me.
One piece of advice for someone building PMO today or TPM teams today?
I will say, and I always say frameworks over process. There is a tendency for PMOs or TPMs of like, oh, my delivery to this is a process. I think that's pretty far from the truth. Your delivery to that is to, help deliver the objective or own the delivery of that objective. It shouldn't be the delivery of a process. And so I always say frameworks over process. And I think I would focus on those before I would say, this is our onboarding process, and, those kinds of things, because, they'll change. You change TPMs, the process changes. It's like, so a framework is usually will stick around for a while. And I would also say, get the right people. You need somebody who's going to take ownership, not take direction. That is, I absolutely adore when one of the, somebody on my team will go, Brett, that's a dumb idea. Here's why. And we'll push back, show that fearlessness, but it's because they own it. And that ownership is something that you want in your TPMs. What else in starting a PMO? I think I would also work real hard to take control of the macro environment. If there is OKRs and other things that are driven at a company level, step in and try to own some of those, just so it's like that you see the strategy at the very top that gets driven down all the way into the tactics, and showing that end-to-end ownership will then kind of endear you to the organization. Those are 3. I know you asked for 1, but those are 3.
3 is always the right number, Brett.
Okay,
3 is
there you
always
go.
the right number.
It's the magic number.
So thank you so much for being here and sharing all of this. I feel like I learned so much in just last couple of minutes. It's like incredible. So my big takeaway is extreme ownership, which I love, by the way. Never shy away from taking ownership of and really own the outcome of the program. Nobody is going to give you that, hey, here is your responsibility. You just need to identify that and go with that. I think that is the biggest takeaway. This was really, really awesome. So thank you so much for being here today. Really
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. It was fun.
and I'm sure a lot of people will find your insight incredibly valuable, people who are listening to this podcast. So I'm also looking forward. Hopefully, you'll again come back and talk to us more about things.
Yeah, sure. Anytime. I'd be happy to.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad.